let's start with your partnership right here in Texas and Abilene. Bring us up to date on Stargate, how much you have online right now.
Yeah, so we've been investing very heavily in the state of Texas. Abilene has been, one of our marquee campuses that we've been building out.
Wait, hang on. Sorry, guys. Can we start again? Yeah, my bad. Sorry about that. No, it was me.
Okay.
All right.
Go for it.
Okay, good to go. Okay, thanks. Hi, I want to start with your partnership right here in Texas. Bring us up to date on Stargate, how much you have online right now.
Cool, yeah. Thrilled to be here. Texas has been such a great partner to Crusoe as we've built out AI infrastructure for the future, with Abilene being sort of the marquee campus in that portfolio. Today, we sort of started this in two phases. The first phase was the first two buildings of the Abilene campus, which are each about 103 megawatts of IT load, 140 some megawatts of total power capacity. Those two are fully online and operational. A second phase started in February of 2025, and a lot of that capacity is being energized as we speak, with the expectation of it being fully energized later this year.
With all this work, what about the supply chain? Are you concerned about how the Iran war will affect that right now?
The Iran war hasn't really impacted our supply chain super dramatically. I think, we're grateful to be building in Texas, which, has a lot of energy independence, and we have been able to get the power needed to energize the campus. I think the bigger supply chain constraint for us, frankly, is labor. As we're building very big here in Texas, both at Abilene as well as a number of other campuses, and many others are building in Texas and across the United States, there's been a huge pinch on critical trades, things like electricians. Trying to find, the folks that are helping us bring these data centers to life has been a very critical challenge in our overall supply chain process. Plumbers, when we're building these big data centers, there's giant water cooling systems that feed through the data center to cool the chips, requiring a lot of expertise in plumbing, and finding those plumbers to work with us is a challenge.
We did a story on this at one point, what the incentives are actually to get people to come move here and live in these areas while they build this.
Yeah, we've definitely tried to attract folks by increasing the financial incentives, and I think there's very lucrative pay packages that people can benefit from for being a part of and helping stand up this infrastructure of intelligence. And sometimes it requires relocation to markets like Abilene, but we think that we're able to compensate people in a really generous and fair capacity, and that the work is super important.
In a state where we're seeing more and more data centers, how much are you tapping from the grid? I know this is a very big deal here in the state of Texas because there have been grid problems in the past.
Yeah, so we try to be as thoughtful of a partner as we can to the grids and the markets that we operate in. Texas is no different. We try to bring online generation that's needed to support our workloads, as well as working with the grid to be able to take existing capacity that is not negatively impacting other local ratepayers. So in the case of Abilene, we actually built a gas plant on site, about a 350 megawatt gas plant, to help support the load and generation requirements needed to power that AI factory. There's other sites where we've brought online a lot more energy behind the meter between wind, solar, batteries, as well as gas generation to help support the on-site utilization, and actually provide more energy to the market than we're actually consuming on an average basis. So we believe it's actually an incredible opportunity to catalyze new generation that both supports our needs as well as brings down costs for local ratepayers by actually having this abundance of energy.
Obviously, the war in Iran has affected the landscape when it comes to oil and when it comes to power. Are there concerns that there will be fewer AI investments here with the ongoing global tension?
If anything, I think more investments are going to happen here. I think there was a lot of excitement about investing in big AI data centers in the Middle East. I think a lot of that, with some of the drone attacks that we saw at the AWS data center, for instance, I think some of that excitement is tempered, and people have shifted that investment and said, you know what, do we really need to be building these large, very, very expensive GPU data centers in an area that has, this local conflict, or should we be focusing those efforts in more stable economic areas like the United States?
So you think this could actually be an area of opportunity for you?
There's always opportunities in any situation. So I do think that this is going to, the demand is not going anywhere. And so, the investments in the infrastructure are going to need to be made, whether it's in the Middle East or Europe or the United States. We know they're going to happen, and we think we can be a big part of, helping make those a reality.
Since this has been an area of such demand, do you hear anything from investors that they're concerned this could fall off and they won't see the expected returns?
It's definitely something folks are thinking about, and in a lot of ways, I feel like my job as CEO of Crusoe is to be a thoughtful financial engineer in terms of how all of these processes unfold, both in the capital required to build these things, as well as the engineering of the contracts and the offtake arrangements and the credit side of this that really enables the capital formation to happen. In our case, with some of our bigger contracts, they're typically fully guaranteed by investment grade offtake. For many years, so 15 to 20 years of offtake, and with that financial guarantee from investment grade counterparties, people have gotten pretty comfortable with the investment.
I want to ask you before you go. Last year, legislators told data centers they had to curtail their use during peak periods of stress. That's Senate Bill 6. Summer's coming. What does that look like for you?
Well, look, I think this is a great opportunity for data centers to work closely with utilities and local communities with things like curtailment, because there are things that we can do to curtail, and the White House has put together this executive order that is trying to push for a 60-day accelerated review process that would involve data centers having some amount of curtailability in the event of grid strain. And we think that's a net positive, because ultimately it helps us get the power that we need today without having to wait in a 6-year load study. And what we pay for that is actually giving up some amount of flexibility, which we can engineer around between batteries, on-site generation, and curtailment of the actual workload in the data center. So it's something we're thinking through a lot right now, and how we work with our customers in terms of management of the AI workload to meet the needs and the flexibility that's being required by utilities under these moments of heavy grid strain.